Hi everybody, meteorologist Joe Chaffee. Welcome to tonight's Joe Chaffee Weather Show, the 19th of September 2019, on this palindrome day or week or whatever it is. And we are seeing, and actually it's quite interesting, the system that we were paying maybe the least attention to because it formed virtually right on top of the Texas coast is the one that is a standout in terms of the rainfall. Anthony Orr, one of our regulars here on the chat board on this YouTube channel, messaged me today. He's great with stats, as is our chairman here, Scott Briller, that we have seen with Imelda, this minimal tropical storm, now the fourth, the number 4 in terms of heavy rain producers among tropical systems, and of course Harvey being number 1, and Allison as either 2 or 3. So this little tropical storm that kind of formed at the last minute really has been hitting home today. And I did put up a link earlier in the chat. I will put it up again a bit later. There is live coverage going on, obviously, by the TV stations down in Houston. You can certainly find it on YouTube on any search. But I've got a straight link to the ABC affiliate there, so I'll just put it up there in a little while, because I want you to watch me first before you go away and go watch something else. Now, here's a look at the radar at the moment, and actually we're seeing some improvement here in terms of what was there earlier. It was solid rain from Houston east to Beaumont Port Arthur. I mean, we're talking heavy rain with lightning strikes all morning long, and areas that got between 25 and 40 inches of rain just to the east of Houston. And now that heavy rain band has actually dropped southward down to the coast, near and south of Galveston, and beginning to move offshore. What's happening is that the actual center of the remnant depression is moving northward and kind of separating itself a bit from all the tropical moisture that's getting left behind. I'm not 100% sure in terms of what's going on aloft that's causing this to happen. Okay, I was hoping that I would be able to get this radar up, but apparently it's not going to let me. Let's see if I can pull the rainfall. That's what I wanted anyway. So this is the Lake Charles radar. The white area is indicating 15 plus inches. So you can see the cities that this is bordering on with the heaviest rainfalls. And the red area on the scale, in case you can't read it, is anywhere from 6 to 10. The purple is 12 and the white is, the purple is 14. And they do with these colors, and I'm not the best in the world. The purple is 12. Then there's kind of a flatter shade of purple that's a little hard to see going into the white. That's 14. And the white itself is 15. Look, the bottom line is where you see it's purple, it's 12. Where you see it's white is 15. And everybody else is somewhere in between. And this larger area in the yellow, which is a color I do know, okay, and again, I'm not the best when it comes to color coordination, 3 inches or more. So quite a bit of rain has fallen out of this. And we'll go to the Houston-Galveston radar to look at the rainfall totals. Now, on this particular radar, the white is 25 inches and the purple is 18. So there's some overlap here, and I don't know how far back either radar goes in terms of the timing, if this is an actual storm total from the first raindrops, or if it began perhaps a bit later on, so the amounts are a little lower than they otherwise would be. But the bottom line is you can at least get a sense here of how much rain has fallen in this part of Texas and into southwestern Louisiana. It has been excessive, and the reds, by the way, are all 9 inches or more. So it has certainly this tropical storm that was a tropical storm for all of 6 hours by definition of the wind. But this was always going to be in the eyes of the Hurricane Center as a big rain producer. And it's a good takeaway here. We saw that with Florence last year. Make sure, when you're dealing with these tropical systems, it's very important that you kind of pay attention to the whole thing all the way through with regards to what particular storm in terms of impact, because in the case of Florence last year, the media got all wrapped up in the Category 4 in the wind, and when the rain was really going to be the big deal, as the hurricane didn't strengthen to a 4 before landfall. It actually was weakened to a Cat 1 or a borderline Cat 2 going inland, so wind was not the issue. The issue was always going to be big rains because of very, very slow movement and a possible stalling. That did come into play, but that message got lost, and it wound up catching a few folks by surprise, and the rain was never a surprise in that. It was always being indicated front and center. And here in this instance also, in spite of the fact that this was not any kind of strong system, the rain certainly played out. Now here's the satellite loop, and if you look closely, if you look at the northwestern edge of the cloud shield, you can actually see the low-level circulation is pulling northward, while the leftover moisture is kind of blossoming out to the east and south over the Gulf of Mexico. You get these bands that come in and form over the Gulf and just pull all this tropical moisture up northward, and naturally you wind up getting hammered with rainfall. Some of those bands actually even extend as far east as the coast of Mississippi and Alabama, extending southward. You can see that north-south band on the eastern edge of the cloud shield here is pretty evident, and nothing is moving very much. You're getting a little bit of northward movement, but you're not getting much eastward progression. So the same areas are seeing heavy rain after heavy rain after heavy rain. So very much a big deal here. I wouldn't be, Imelda might be a name you may not hear again with all the record rainfall. I don't know what their total, they have retired names in the past that of storms that have produced have been were known more for their heavy rain than anything else, like Agnes in 72 and Allison in 2001 for oddly enough the same area. So it wouldn't be usual to retire a name of a tropical storm. They don't have to be Category 5 hurricanes. The names are retired if they have a big impact. So we'll see what they do. That's an end of the year type decision on the part of the Hurricane Center. Pretty much known that we're never going to have a Hurricane Dorian again. I think that's pretty safe to say. Meanwhile, we have Hurricane Jerry, and Hurricane Jerry is a compact storm and continues to organize here as it's in an area where the wind shear is still pretty light, and it's going to probably strengthen a bit more overnight into tomorrow. But I would like to point out, if you look at the satellite loop here and you watch the clouds from the Caribbean across the Dominican Republic and then on northward, there's strong upper level winds that are present here, and there is a remnant trough that is whoops, I wasn't supposed to do that. Why is it doing that? Let me try that again. So it's out of control here, folks. All right, so you have a trough here. This is the remnant trough from Umberto that went over Bermuda. Past northwest of Bermuda last night by about 100 or so miles. Bermuda had, if you were on the live stream last night, we had, while the live stream was going on, we had 86 mile an hour sustained winds with gusts to 116, I think it was. That was just insane. But Umberto is leaving a trough behind down into the Bahamas and into the Caribbean. So you're seeing a lot of these clouds blowing off from southwest to northeast. These are strong upper level winds that Jerry is going to get into. And once that happens, we may actually see Jerry weaken a little bit. It looks like on its west-northwest course that Jerry will pass north of the northernmost Leeward Islands. So we do have tropical storm watches up for the same islands that we were talking about last night, St. Martin, St. Bartholomew, St. Eustatius, Barbuda, Antigua, and a few others. It's quite possible that they may go to a warning in some or all of those islands. But in terms of hurricane conditions, I think that Jerry is going to pass at least 120 miles north of the northernmost Leeward Islands. So I don't really think they're going to get into the core. Plus, again, the storm is on the smallish side. Now, you can see it here. It doesn't really cover a whole lot of geography. It's only a few degrees. The diameter of the storm is only maybe about 4 or 5 degrees in diameter, and gales don't really go out very far. So you're really going to have to get very close to it in order to experience the fringe effects, let alone getting into the actual hurricane conditions, which are tightly wound near center by about 20 or so miles. So that's at least some good news from that standpoint. And Jerry might wind up being something that Bermuda might have to keep an eye on. It could be a bit of a 1-2 punch here from the standpoint of the future track. We'll put up the Hurricane Center's forecast here, and we'll go through the models a bit later on so you can see what happens. So they keep it a hurricane, although they never really strengthened it much beyond a Category 1. And because of that trough that's left over along the East Coast, you're going to have this recurve east of 70 degrees west. And the Hurricane Center has it pretty much right over Bermuda by 2 p.m. on Tuesday. So this looks like we could see deteriorating weather conditions in Bermuda Monday night into Tuesday as Jerry approaches, assuming that those strong upper level winds don't tear it completely apart. It might weaken it some, whether it's enough to bring this down to more of a tropical storm or not remains to be seen. Sometimes that wind shear can be pretty fierce. Hurricanes will fight it as best they can, but if the winds are too strong, it certainly will have an impact on the strength. Eventually, those winds may lighten enough so that conditions could become a bit more favorable as it approaches Bermuda. So it's pretty complex in terms of what may happen here. But we can tell you there's no imminent threat. And obviously, if you look at the track that the Hurricane Center has drawn and where the plots are with relation to the northern Leeward Islands, it's a fair distance there that the hurricane passes north of those islands. And clearly, it's north of the Virgin Islands, north of Puerto Rico, and well to the north and east of the Dominican Republic and Haiti, and also, importantly, to the east of even the easternmost Bahamas. The Bahamas don't need to deal with another tropical system after having experienced the Category 5 veracity that was Hurricane Dorian. I'm going to bring up the U.S. satellite picture, the U.S. satellite loop. And one thing, while all of this is going on, is the fact that, well, it is delightful in the eastern part of the United States. An absolutely gorgeous day. And temperatures where I am on Long Island, I'm not there now, but it didn't get out of the 60s today. And most of the area from northeast Virginia to southern New England finished up in the upper 60s and lower 70s. It was just a terrific late summer / early fall type of day. And I think we could safely say that summer is done. And when I mean summer is done, I mean that is it going to all of a sudden be cool every day? No, of course not. That just isn't how weather works. I get such a chuckle sometimes with people's impressions about weather, as if switches are flipped and suddenly it's a certain season, therefore it can't be warm or it can't be cold or whatever it is. Summer is done. As far as if this were going to be going forward the way I'm seeing it, if this were going to be something like last year, where if you remember, we had unrelenting humidity through much of September into the first week or so of October before that finally broke. You go back to some past years where it was very warm with temperatures in the 80s, well above normal for a stretch through September and October, interrupted every once in a while by a couple of cool days here and there, and then you would get into another 5, 6, or 7 day stretch of unseasonably warm weather. That's not going to happen, okay? What you're going to see going forward is that you're going to have warm-ups that are going to occur in between cold fronts that will be passing through every 3 days or so, and those warm-ups will take temperatures up a bit, and then we're going to cool back down to seasonal levels and maybe even get to a stretch as we get into October where the temperatures go a bit below average for a little while. At least that's the way I'm seeing it with respect to the longer range. But the weekend's going to bring temperatures back up into the 80s. That's something that can happen anytime, so it's not some kind of endless summer, okay? As someone referred to on one of my Facebook posts. Okay, so WPC, in terms of rainfall, you can see how bone dry it still remains through much of the east down to Florida, although the rainfall amounts are a bit higher as you go north and west of the coastline in New England and you head up into northern New York State and back up through northern Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine, and also from the Great Lakes down into the middle Mississippi Valley and Central Plains and into northeast Texas. Now, the rain you see in southeast Texas and southwest Louisiana, obviously that's from what's going on now. So that is going to be winding down pretty quickly. So at least from that standpoint, the rain is going to be cut way back going forward in that part of Texas. So we'll get a chance to at least drain some of that water. Still pretty active in the southwest, with rainfall amounts up to a few inches in parts of Arizona, and you're seeing dry patches through parts of Colorado and Wyoming, and some patches of heavier rains as you get up into Montana and into the Pacific Northwest. Otherwise, the precip in the western part of the United States is on the light side. So let's come back to the maps here. And again, here's this was the Hurricane Center's forecast with respect to Jerry. So going forward, let's take a look at the upper air out in the Atlantic and see if we can figure out what Jerry's going to do and why it's going to do it. The Umberto, which, as I said, there's a trough that's being left behind. If starting with the upper air from a few days ago here on the GFS, maps courtesy of tropicaltidbits.com, by the way, my go-to source for looking at weather models, and it should be your go-to source as well. So here we go with this trough that's out in the Atlantic Ocean, and extends from just between Greenland and Newfoundland. We are seeing there was an upper low there, and we're moving into Thursday evening now. So what's left behind is part of this trough that was from Greenland south and west. The bottom part of it got left behind, and you see it here. And this little dot is what's left of Umberto as it becomes a post-tropical system. You have an upper high out in the Atlantic. Here is Jerry, and Jerry is moving around the periphery of this upper high, and off the east coast, south of this trough, there's an upper low that is sitting out in the Atlantic. And I mentioned the fact that you have these strong winds in the upper atmosphere, and you saw the clouds being blown from southwest to northeast across the Caribbean and up the east coast. That's the trough I'm talking about. That's the big weakness that's been left behind. There's an upper high back through here in the Gulf states, and this trough sits between the two upper highs. So Jerry is going to want to go to the path of least resistance, which is the trough that Umberto leaves, and that pulls out to the northeast. And you see here, as we go through Saturday and Sunday, you got a definite weakness here. There's an upper high that is building in the Gulf states into the southeast. You've got this upper high that is out in the Atlantic that extends to about the same longitude as the Leeward Islands. And there's a trough that runs from this, what looks like there probably is some kind of low here in the upper atmosphere, but there's a trough that extends southwestward, and it cuts through in between those two highs Jerry is going to, again, run through the periphery, run around the periphery of the high out to the east and into this weakness between the two upper highs. If, for example, if this ridge were really strong, where these highs were building, and you would see, the ridge try to kind of connect in this sort of fashion, then you would probably see Jerry go more west-northwest toward the Bahamas and to Florida. But you don't have that. You've got that weakness in between that opens the door. And as it makes the turn, of course, that trough is going to wind up pulling out. And we're going to see, this is now for Sunday, the trough pulls out a bit, and then Jerry kind of gets lifted up by the next short wave right here. That's going to be coming into the northeast with a cold front late on Monday. That'll be the first break in this long stretch of dry weather. So this short wave, if you want to see the history of that short wave, here it is on Sunday. I'll back it up a bit. And here it is on Saturday coming out of the northern plains. And then on Sunday, I went a little bit too fast. By Sunday evening, it's running from the western lakes down into Oklahoma. And then as we go into Monday night, it is running right there. And the next line I have drawn, I believe, is for 2 a.m. Tuesday. And Jerry at this point is now responding to this upper trough by completing the turn and possibly moving over or close to Bermuda. And it'll be interesting to see how much impact these strong upper air winds have on Jerry before it pulls out to the northeast. Now, while all that's going on, I would like to point out that early next week, there's going to be a strong tropical wave that moves off the African coast and moves westward. And the European and the GFS both pick up on this. The European's been picking up on this for days. This is Monday, and it's right here as a reflection of looking at this at the 18,000 foot level. And that's actually a fair distance south of the Cabo Verde Islands. We may have the system move off as it quickly become a tropical depression or a tropical storm as it's at the longitude of the Cabo Verde Islands, and it's going to be moving toward the west. Now, the odd thing is that we're seeing how Umberto's leftover trough is going to turn Jerry. Well, Jerry's going to have his own trough, and it's going to try to break down through the ridge and create a weakness, and you can see it here. And at the same time, by the way, you also have a shortwave trough that's going to be screaming across Canada next week and into eastern Canada. So it's quite possible that you could wind up with a well-developed hurricane out here in the tropical Atlantic, but it never even makes it to 55 degrees west before it makes the turn, or doesn't even make 60 certainly. It may not even make 55 before it responds to this crashing jet stream out in the Atlantic and turns northward and northeastward and moves on toward the Azores and beyond. Look at how strong this upper air feature gets. This is 10 days from now, and we'll probably see some changes here. I've seen it for a couple of runs in a row, several runs in a row, that the models are making a big deal out of this upper low that forms over Newfoundland. That drives the jet stream pretty far to the south in the Atlantic. So it's going to be it's going to be very hard. You're going to have, in order for something to make westward progress, you're going to need something to form way down here and kind of stay underneath all of this in order to, gain traction and move westward without being impacted by those strong westerlies that are dropping southward. And going forward, as I said earlier about summer being over and in general, and seeing just brief warm-ups in between, those warm-ups come when the ridge pops up along the East Coast. You're seeing that to a certain extent. You're seeing that this weekend, okay? And that's going to take temperatures up into the 80s. And by the way, I want to mention also the fact that the humidity this weekend is actually going to be relatively subdued, which is nice. You see dew points on Saturday and Sunday will still be in the 50s. Even on Monday, ahead of the cold front, they only get back to about 60 or so. So the weekend is going to be warm, but it's going to be reasonably comfortable, I think. And then, as these short waves go by, the one on Monday, after that goes by, a little bit of a ridge builds in the east, not much of one. You have a deeper trough that swings into the southeast towards Thursday and Friday. Then you get another pop-up of the ridge for the last weekend of September, okay? But then that goes away as you get this deep trough forming out in the Atlantic, and that's going to bring down some cooler air from eastern Canada down into New England and at least into the Northeast, if not bringing it down even into the northern parts of the mid-Atlantic states. And then you get more. Then the jet really kind of gets strong from the west, and the ridge disappears as we go into October. So this will start bringing in some cooler air masses along the way. By the way, I was working with the 12Z run of the GFS. We could take a look. So I love when we go to the 18Z and you look at this in the long range and you see what there was a trough, there's suddenly a ridge. Well, I mean, to a certain extent, may not be. Let me see if it's out all the way. It is out all the way. This is toward the end of the period, but here you have again, same idea here. You're not going to see much different in this run. The systems out in the Atlantic all make their turn, and in fact, hang on. So you get that ridge. The ridge pops up this weekend. Then the ridge pops up again next weekend, but it shifts more to the west. And then as we go into those first days of October, it gets flattened pretty quickly. And you get that, there's that action that goes into Newfoundland, gets reinforced. Then the ridge kind of flexes up a little bit after that. It's this. This is looking like we're going into something that people who like typical falls may actually get to see one. So that's the kind of the way things are looking at from my perspective. So I'm coming to the chat board here, guys, so hang on one second. There we go. I got so many things running on the screen sometimes that it takes a while for everything to load, for the page to load back. But now I can see big hellos to everybody. Joyce Mack, Scott Briller, the chairman, Chuck Cardillo. Scott, thanks for hitting Super Chat tonight. Anthony Orr is on, and we've got Jacob asking, what is a typical fall? A typical fall is where you are, if you look at your temperatures, they're going to average out close to seasonal. You're going to have fluctuations, and you'll have a few days where it gets a little warmer. You will get a few days where it gets a bit cooler. So that, as opposed to having stretches of days and days of above average temperatures, like we've seen in some of the past autumns where you're still running well above normal temperature-wise going into the month of November, I don't think you're going to see that this time around, okay? And you're certainly not going to see what we saw last year, where we had just unrelenting humidity in the east anyway, in the northeast and mid-Atlantic states, unrelenting humidity into the first week or two of October. God, I hated that. That was just god-awful. Seeing dew points up at 74 or 5 in the early part of October was almost unheard of. I see a few people have been put in timeouts. I don't know what's going on the chat board, but the moderators are keeping things under control. So just a little bit of a word to the wise, okay? That's all that's usually needed. K-Nay, 25 inches of rain. So you're in the Houston area. Yeah, that's. I saw what was going on at this. Is it KTRK? Is the Houston station, channel 13? I'm trying to remember from my Corpus Christi days. So here's a link on the chat board if you want to watch their live coverage, because they've been at it all day, and they've been showing some very impressive shots of all the flooding, particularly on the roadways. To see water halfway up the side of a Mack truck and cars completely underneath. I mean, that's just awful. But it's the flooding rains and this tropical setup that occurred. And, it kind of brought to mind something with regards to Houston. I remember seeing stories after Harvey was going on, and talking about some of the infrastructure there, and a couple of the, I believe, some of the reservoirs and how they were built. And I'm just I'm curious as to whether some of those issues have been addressed or are being addressed post Hurricane Harvey. Because if they're not, this system, Imelda, may put those issues front and center again. Anthony Orr is completely correct in pointing out that Umberto has completed its extratropical transition or about to complete it, and more than likely the Hurricane Center will make it post-tropical or ex-tropical as of the 11 o'clock advisory. Just running back through the chat here. Okay. So I know whatever was going on the boards, guys. Thanks to the moderators for keeping things uncontrolled. East Coast getting very dry weather, says CNN MNSBC. I think you typed your name too quick. CBS, NBC, Fox News, breaking news, BRACKING. Joe, East Coast getting very dry weather, no big rain, we need rain. Oddly enough, with all the thunderstorms that we had and all the rain we had over the summer months, it was really kind of concentrated to a certain extent. And it has been very dry since the latter part of August, and started to see that tail off a bit. And it's been dry for the last week to 10 days. Dries up very quickly. And we haven't had a good soaking rain in a while. I don't know what the monthly rainfall totals are. There were some isolated heavier downpours around my area on Saturday, but they were just that. They were scattered to isolated, and the vast majority of folks didn't see a thing. So the next chance for any showers looks to be about Monday, which is something I didn't do, by the way. Let's go back. We talked about the upper air. Let me just really quick bring up the surface map, and we can take a look at where the weather's going here. Yep, that's snow that's up by the Canadian border for you snow lovers up in the west. So you've got your high moving down to the south off the mid-Atlantic coast. The winds are going around to the southwest, and you can see the next cold front by Sunday morning, running from just west of Chicago down to northern Missouri into Kansas. And then by Monday evening, the cold front is going to be right along the coast with some showers and getting ready to move eastward. Here's Jerry, and your next high is right behind it. We're going to move that front through. Dry air follows, and it looks like much of the rest of next week is dry, and then the models start to do things for the last weekend of September. Running up to a stronger cold front around October 1st. We'll see if that's real. So maybe we'll get some chances for showers. And by the way, that is snow that moves across southern Canada. You're going to start to see that a bit more often if the jet stream gets into that pattern that we're showing. We're getting, October, you start to see the blue begin to gradually reappear on those surface maps. So it'll give you snow lovers something to salivate over in the coming weeks and months. I'm not trying to tease the snow lovers because I am one of them myself. Thank you, Jess Harden. Really appreciate it. I just do the best I can. I have a lot of, I have always loved what I've done. This is my career. I've been doing it this is 40 years this year that I've been doing television. And I guess if you want to count everything, probably about 42 or 3 years that I've been involved in weather in one form or another. So it went fast. So I guess I must have had a good time at it. Okay. Let's see. Oh, Joyce Mack, you're talking about brain farted. Boy, I can relate to that. I had a couple of them today. People that I've known that I've worked with for long periods of time, and I had these brief moments where I couldn't remember the person's name. It was so embarrassing. But for those of you who aren't my age, one day you'll be my age and you'll get what I'm saying. Will the Caribbean be more active for hurricanes this October instead of the East Coast? Asked PJ Weather. You know, there's been somebody brought up the other day about the Madden-Julian oscillation shifting, and that meant that we were going to see activity in the Caribbean and in the Gulf of Mexico. Honestly, I have not even given it a second thought, nor have I even looked at that and what it means. That's a long-range issue for the long-range folks. Climatologically speaking, you do see the area of development shift back westward out of the tropical Atlantic in October and more toward the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico. Although the Atlantic itself, especially from 50 degrees west on westward in the subtropics, remains very warm. And you could have tropical storms or hurricanes form out there even into the month of November, and they have. But the general area tends to shift westward back through the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico by the time you get to late October and November. So if it just follows the normal scope of things, the answer to your question is yes. The only thing I would say is that this year everything seems to be wanting to form out on the Atlantic side and less so in the Gulf of Mexico, and there's been hardly anything in the Caribbean to speak of. So, the trend is your friend, so just kind of follow along with what's been happening right now until proven otherwise. And by the way, there was a mention in USA Today. It was funny because the other day I posted the headline of my live stream was that the tropics were on fire, and someone took issue with that. And my point was that we had 3 named storms at the same time, and you don't really see that. It happens in the Atlantic Basin, but you don't see it that often. Certainly you don't see that every year. But then USA Today mentioned today, and this was a little unusual in that you've got 3 storms you had 3 named storms in the Atlantic Basin, but you also had 3 named storms in the East Pacific going on at the same time. And usually when the Atlantic is really revving, the Pacific side is very quiet. So it's kind of odd to see the Pacific and the Atlantic both having 3 named storms at the same time. That doesn't happen very often. But having 6 in this view, East Pacific and Atlantic Basin, to have 6 going on at the same time, 6 named storms at the same time. Apparently, this was some kind of record. The prior record was 5, and I can remember there was 5 in the Atlantic Basin, I believe, at the same time back in 1966, and you can make a case for it being 6, except that one system had just become extratropical or post-tropical, and I believe in maybe in 2005 when we ran the table on the alphabet. It was 2005 that we ran the alphabet, or was it 2008? I forgot. But with the year that we went through the whole name list and had to go to the Greek alphabet for a couple of storms. I think there was one stretch in there where there might have been 4 named storms at the same time. But this was the first time on the Atlantic side with none on the Pacific side. So this apparently was the first time that we had 6 with 3 on one side and 3 on the other, accounting for the 6 named storms. So I guess you could say that the tropics were on fire if you include the storms in the East Pacific. So there. I was, to be completely honest about it, I was just really thinking about the Atlantic side, but I guess USA Today came to my rescue to some degree. Ruthless Goat in dry Colorado. We got to get your pattern to change there so you can cool off and get some precip, which maybe happens in the longer term when that whole jet drops down and starts to get things moving again. So we'll keep our fingers crossed on that. All right, folks, I'm going to call it a night a little early tonight. Joe Rayo and I went about an hour and 20 yesterday, and we had a great time. But I'm going to catch a little bit of a break since the weather's a bit calmer tonight. Tomorrow is Friday, so we will have our regular YouTube live stream at 7 o'clock Eastern Time, so hope you can join us then. Weather in 5 tomorrow. I'll do it in the morning. I got hung up this morning doing a few things, so I didn't get to do it until about 12:30 or so. So you've got weather in 5 in the early afternoon. But you'll have weather in 5 in the morning, website posts in between, and you will have our YouTube live stream tomorrow night at 7 o'clock Eastern Time. Okay? Thanks, everybody, for being here. Thank you for your support, by the way. Those of you who've hit Super Chat, I really appreciate it over the last few weeks and months. Thanks a lot. I get a couple of cigars out of it. I'm very happy. And for those of you who have used the Amazon link that is on here to buy your Amazon stuff, because Amazon throws me back a little bit of coin for that, and that goes a long way as well. Download my free weather app on Google Play or on the App Store. Just search Meteorologist Joe Chaffee or just plain old Joe Chaffee, and add it to your app collection. We will see you tomorrow.